Another day, another mob comes after Joe Rogan. Well, this is a old mob resurfacing their sad, angry, mobbish heads, and they want Joe Rogan canceled. In fact, there are only certain people that are allowed to go on Joe Rogan, especially not if you are a Hollywood elite. You know, Demi Lovato went on to talk about her battles, and she was given a ton of flack for it. Each day this week, I'm going to remind people that I am backing way off Twitter and Parler and Facebook and moving my conversations with all of you exclusively to Telegram. It's just infinitely better. It's better for my headspace. I understand if you don't want to join yet another app, but I really won't be using Twitter or anything else other than topic mining, and eventually I'll move directly there. So link will be in the pinned comment below. There's a limited number of people that can join, so make sure you join today. Now, Joe Rogan getting ripped by the first openly trans MMA fighter for recent remarks. Now, in order to go forward, we must go back. Fallon Fox is a biological male who transitioned or began transitioning, but fought biological females. This person was called, and I quote, hold on, wait for it. Wait. They were awarded the Profile of Courage. A trans MMA fighter who broke female skull, portrayed Profile in Courage, bravest athlete in history. That's right. If you were, born a man and given all those physical advantages over women, especially in a contact sport, it is surely brave if you go and pummel them. Now, I will say, this is a dicey topic, but for me, for contact sports, or like Olympic athlete type categories, this is just one of those tough cookies categories. Look, I am 100% for people living their best life. Really. I know I have a decent sized trans audience, and my opinion's always been the same, and they know that. Live your best life as long as you're not infringing on anybody else, and I 100% support you. In this particular case, you get into the infringement category. This is somebody who was, biologically male for, 35 years or something like that, 30 years. And then they took some treatments for 2 years, and then they pummeled biological women in the ring. Now, it is worth mentioning that Fallon Fox did eventually lose to a female fighter, a biological female fighter. But I don't care. Ultimately, you don't ever see it the other way. You don't see biological women, pushing each other out of the way as they've transitioned to male to compete in male-dominated sports. It's only the other way. It creates a huge, huge advantage for them. And I don't mean, it's not hurtful because it's just a biological fact. I understand, the 7 people out there who, are affected by this, who, really still want to compete, but also are battling with their personal identities. It's a complicated issue and it sucks. But the reality is, I'm on the side of Joe Rogan here on this one, and was at the time when this happened back, I don't know, was it 2018 or something like that. But now that Fallon Fox is long irrelevant, the MMA fighter Fallon Fox is now calling out Joe Rogan for recent comments he made on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. The retired MMA brawler was previously targeted by longtime UFC commentator on a show in 2013, when Rogan called her man, saying she's not really a she. First of all, she's not really a she. She's trans. Post-op. The operation doesn't shave down your bone density. It doesn't change. You look at a man's hands, you look at a woman's hands, they're built different. They're just thicker, they're stronger, your wrists are thicker, your elbows are thicker, your joints are thicker. Just the mechanical function of punching, a man can do it harder than a woman can, period. Now, of course, there are exceptions. I'm sure there are plenty of women out there that could hit harder than me, but when you're apples to apples, you know, two trained athletes in the same position, you know, I suppose that point is more true. It's definitely true way more often than not. Now, the retired, I'm sorry. So Fox then took to social media saying Joe Rogan is being phobic yet again. He's had more phobic episodes than you can shake a stick at. Spotify needs to cancel his show. So demand to cancel his show. Fox was responding to Rogan's recent interview with fellow comedian Jim Breuer, by the way, one of the GOATs, that where he said about the trans community, the problem is it becomes a protected subject and that you get praised for transferring your gender, for changing your gender, and then it gets exciting for people to talk about, and then you get chastised for even discussing it in any weird way. Joe is right here. It is a very, I purposely don't touch on the issues on this channel. It's just the nuance is too deep and the penalty is too high for having an opinion. Even if you're just, if no ill will is intended, it's enough to get the mobs after you on Twitter, which is why I'm leaving Twitter to just mining topics and not having conversations, because it's just toxic. You see, Padma Lakshmi says, trans people don't need to prove anything to you. They've lived experience. That's not up for debate. Stop policing people who don't adhere to your ignorant construct of heteronormativity. And it says, will you call on Spotify to drop Joe Rogan from his $100 million contract? Rogan devotes hours of his podcast to phobic talking points. On his recent broadcast, he calls trans kids generally dumb people and idiots who transfer over to get praised. That's not what he said, of course. And this is the problem. Excuse me. I've long believed that there are genuine allies in this community. But then the trans community has a real marketing problem with these toxic, these toxic allies who aren't even members of that community, but just are willing to lie and spread this kind of stuff around you, about you. It doesn't do the trans community literally any good to do this. You know, Rogan earlier said about trans folks, this has always been a thing, but it's been taboo and hidden for most part. He told Breuer it's not fake. Rogan later said about transitioning, human beings, if they want to do this as an adult and they know for a fact they want to do it, then they should be able to make their own choices. But when you have really young kids and you have all this reinforcement from people, activists that literally encourage people to do this, you can't quantify what's going on inside that person's mind. Fox, who was the first openly trans athlete in MMA history, retired in 2014 with a record of 6 wins and 1 loss by knockout. That one loss was a female. But, I mean, you could just look, you know, you're talking about somebody who is cracking skulls. Now, I believe it was the orbital bone or something like that on one opponent. I think it was 2 different opponents that they did this to. You're not talking about apples to apples here. And I do understand that, you know, Fallon Fox probably still wanted to fight, and their transition, you know, didn't erase that want to fight. But unfortunately, competing in a professional level against biological females creates a massive advantage, and it's just not something you're going to be able to do. You're going to have to give it up, or you're going to have to wait until after your career to transition. I mean, I feel like these are reasonable solutions. You know, fighting professionally in a particular gendered class is not an inalienable right. And while I do feel for these people who suffer, who are caught between 2, you know, passions, for example, I think what this is essentially is Fallon Fox is basically irrelevant now, and, you know, wanted to try and cancel Joe Rogan. Their call to cancel a Spotify show failed miserably. And even look, you know, pop star slam for going on Joe Rogan. Why? Lovato, who performed for President Joe Biden's inauguration in January and who has often supported Democrats and liberal causes, raised some eyebrows going on the podcast that is seen as controversial by many on the left, like 700 people. All right. The idea that the Joe Rogan podcast is like controversial or something, you know, scary, is hilarious because it's the #1 podcast in the world. So if it were seen as, you know, some sort of, you know, bad thing or, you know, overall a negative, don't you think that the numbers would reflect that? Obviously. After episode 1625 was posted to Rogan on Sunday, some Lovato fans pushed back against her decision to go on the podcast. Not Joe Rogan, Demi, why? Another tweeted, Demi Lovato on Joe Rogan, ma'am, why? Why is Demi on Joe Rogan? Lovato opened up about her life in a YouTube documentary, Dancing with the Devil, that premiered a week before her appearance on Rogan's podcast. On the podcast with Rogan, Lovato talked about her sobriety, practicing jiu-jitsu, and having having mean words said to them as a teen celebrity. Look, I get that people like to hate on Joe Rogan, but first of all, Spotify isn't canceling his show. That's just not happening. Second of all, at least like if you're going to try to go after somebody, try to go after them for something realistic. You could say someone called him a right-wing-ist and an a-hole, and his show is really popular with edgelords. I don't know. People call me an edgelord, but I don't watch his show. Ever since he left YouTube, I've got zero interest in going to Spotify to listen to him. But, you know, Rogan's always going to have, you know, Rogan's just right about this. I know that it puts a few people in really crummy positions who still really want to compete. But, look, it's just going to be one of those things. Sorry. You could see all the replies here. You know, 22 likes Lamau. Joe Rogan is absolutely not phobic or any other type of thing. If you listen to every podcast, you know he isn't. You know, I enjoy watching. I watch Ashley Evans Smith taking you down for the joy of it. She did it despite her being female and you biologically male through sheer skill. You know, it sucked because people had to, you know, fight this person or risk being canceled. You know, here's an article by Tracy Holmes saying 5 myths about athletes debunked. Well, I mean, there's, you know, there's certain sports maybe where it would be more even. Certainly if you consider things like chess but they don't really have a men's and women's league. Maybe there's a few you could make this argument for. But when you talk about MMA, you're just not going to convince many people, and the biology backs it up. I mean, again, it creates a crummy situation for somebody who's going through that, but that's just the way it has to be. And no, Joe Rogan's not going to get his $100 million Spotify contract canceled over it. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.